tonight. I don't get the chance to do it that often. I'm always busy on Sundays, unfortunately. But it is just wonderful to be here. Just to share something, I came and I taught in your VBS. And I am so glad you guys invited me to do that. I had such a good time. I enjoyed getting to know the kids, but it was just such a bright spot in my summer. And so just want to thank you guys for that opportunity as well. But thank you for letting me come and teach for you. It's just wonderful to have a congregation of brothers and sisters right across town. And I wish I got to spend more time with you, but it's good. I treasure the times we do have. So thank you for welcoming me and my family here with you tonight. I want to talk about having hard hearts and hard times. As you hear that, it sounds kind of like a harsh lesson name as you think about that. Well, that doesn't sound very nice. It doesn't sound like a good thing to do. But the truth is it's something that happens. It's a challenge we all have that we need to overcome. And as we get into it, the timing is almost exactly 1 year before Jesus is crucified. At the beginning of John 6, it says it was the time of the feast of the Passover, which is the last year of Jesus' ministry. And so during that time, Jesus is with his disciples. They are finally his disciples following him. They've been following him for a while, but he called them not too much earlier than this. And he's been teaching them. He sent them out to go on their first mission for him. They get back and they talk about their success. And he wants to go to the other side of the sea to debrief. Jesus had been in Capernaum when he got news John the Baptist had died. And what a heartbreaking thing. His cousin, his fellow teacher in Jerusalem, the two great men, the forerunner. And Jesus wanted to go get alone, spend some time with his disciples, debrief about how things went. And they get in their boat in Capernaum and go across the sea to a desolate place. And when they get there, there's a crowd of people waiting to hear, wanting more from them. And one of the great things about Jesus is he wasn't irritated. He wasn't put out or upset. It said he looked on them and having compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so you see this great heart of Jesus. And these men who follow Jesus just see this day in and day out. And wouldn't you love to have been in their shoes, following Jesus, seeing what he did, seeing his family who thought he was crazy because so many people were coming to him to be healed or taught, or he was just giving to everyone. And even when he's worn out, had bad news, he's tired, he wants to go to a lonely place, and there's a group of people that follow him to get something from him, to take from him, he has compassion on them. And ultimately, he starts teaching them, and he feeds them. 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And his disciples were out there. They take these 5 loaves. I don't know how it happened. I can't imagine what that would have been like. But you just keep taking chunks off of the same piece of bread and handing it out. They gathered up a lot more than they handed out after feeding all these people. And so you just see this amazing, miraculous thing happen. And one of the comments, and we'll get to this in a minute, but one of the comments said about his disciples is they didn't understand because their hearts were hardened. And so they struggled. And I want to talk about that because I think we have the same sorts of things. You look in Mark chapter 5, and starting in verse, 42. Mark chapter 6, Mark chapter 6, verse 45. Jesus just finished feeding the 5,000. It was late in the day, getting towards evening. He puts them in the boat, says, go across the lake. I'm going to stay here for a while. I'll catch up with you on the other side. So they get out in the boat. When I got here, it was just dusk. It was just starting to get dark, but you still had some light. And that's how I imagine the circumstances were. Just dusk. Maybe there's a sunset, a clear sky. They're getting in the boat. It's the time of the Passover, so the Passover is always on the full moon. So the moon would have been at least in one of its brighter phases, which makes sense in some of the things we'll see. But they get in the boat and start rowing out across the sea. And the water's calm for a while. But as they're out in the sea, as sometimes happened, a wind blows across the Sea of Galilee. And they're trying to cross from sort of the western shore up towards the northern shore. And the wind blows in from the north. And so they're kind of getting blown away from where they want to go. And the wind, in the water, you get wind, you get chop, right? I have a little 14-foot fishing boat. And it's got a trolling motor on the front. And when you're bass fishing, you like to stop your boat and fish a spot for a while and move on and have a little bit of control over where your boat is. And I hate fishing in the wind. Because if I look down, if I tie a knot, I look up, I'm like way away from where I thought I was going to be. The boat just blows away in the wind. And these guys are in this heavy wooden boat with oars, trying to cross the lake. The lights are getting darker. Maybe they don't have a good line of sight where they're going. And the chop is picking up. If you look back in Mark chapter 4, we know they're concerned about being in stormy seas because Jesus was with them at this point in Mark 4, and he was sleeping, but he was with them. And they're like, we're perishing, don't you care? We're all going to die. But they're out in a similar situation, except for Jesus is not with them. So the wave starts chopping. The wind is blowing south. They're trying to go north. They're getting blown off a course, trying to row into the wind. I imagine maybe the water spraying on them. Cold, wet, scared. When you're out in the ocean and you're cold and wet and scared, maybe they're praying, asking God, help us to get through this, help us to get where we want to go, help us just to come out safe in this situation. It's the fourth watch of the night. Now, the first watch is between 6 and 9. The second watch is from 9 to midnight. The third watch is from midnight to 3. And the fourth watch from 3 to 6. It's in the fourth watch, which means if they started at dusk, maybe it was in the second watch sometime, maybe it's summertime and you have longer days. They've been rowing for 6 to 9 hours, rowing this boat, trying to get where they want to go, stuck in the waves. How tired do you get rowing a boat for just 1 hour? Right? It's troublesome. Now, how about rowing against the wind? How's that? Yeah, it's troublesome. My brother-in-law was on this little pontoon boat in eastern Washington. A wind picked up, and people were like on the shore watching him because he was rowing, but he wasn't going anywhere. And they were rooting for him, like, is he going to make it? Like, can he get past the wind? And that's the sort of thing they had going. Rowing for 6 to 9 hours. Your body starts getting tired. Now, even if you had a good meal, your body starts getting tired. That's a lot of expended energy. But what happens if they stop rowing? They want to go to the north end of the lake. They're going to end up in the south end of the lake. Maybe they'll get turned the wrong way to the waves, and the waves will topple their boat over. But here they are out in the middle of the water, rowing against the wind, getting tired, scared, in the dark, in the fourth watch, and they see something out on the water, and it's got a definite shape. Now think about their situation. What were they just doing the previous couple of weeks or whatever it was? They were out there casting out demons. They were out there rebuking demons, and now they're in the lake in a hard time in the dark, and they see the shape of something walking through the storm and coming towards them. I don't know if they're thinking, maybe it's time for them to get us back. They found us vulnerable. I don't know if that's what they're thinking, but they were afraid. We know that. We know they saw this form out in the water, and it scared them because they thought it was some sort of spirit or ghost. Freaked out, right? And when they got scared, Jesus says, don't fear, it's me, I'm here. It's just me. And so Peter says, if it's you, Lord, command me to come out on the water. So Peter steps out on the water in an act of boldness and faith, and then he realized, I'm on the water, and starts to sink into the water. And help me, save me, Lord, save me, Lord. And the Lord saves him. And they get into the boat. The storm calms. They're at the other shore. And he says, "O you of little faith." So that's from the perspectives of the disciples. They had a bad night. They were scared. They're having a hard time. Now, from another perspective, Jesus' perspective, he stayed behind to send the crowd away. So they get in the boat, they take off. Jesus dismisses the crowd. This crowd was actually, I believe we're told in John, they were wanting to take him and make him a king by force. And so he diffused that, sent them away, and he went up onto a mountain to pray. Now, if there's a wind down around the Sea of Galilee, there's all these high hills. The sea's kind of in a low spot, and the hills come up around it. So if there's a wind down on the lake, up on top of the hill, there's also going to be a wind, right? So Jesus is sitting up there. He's going to feel the wind. I imagine it's a clear night because one of the things Jesus is up here doing on this hill, it says he can see them straining against the wind. He's watching his disciples. He's praying to God. I use this picture because I imagine a full moon. The light's enough for him to see and everything. So Jesus is out there on top of the hill, praying, watching his disciples. And when he sees their struggle get to a certain point, he goes down, he's crossing the sea, close to them at least. It says that he was intending to walk by them, but when he got close enough that they saw him, so he passed by closely, but they saw him, they got scared, so he made himself known to them and joined them in the boat. So that's what we see happening. That's what we're looking at tonight. But the disciples had a problem. Really, that's the focus of the story. They had a problem, and it was that they did not, Mark 6:52 says, "For they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened." See, when they saw Jesus walking on the water, they were astonished. Who is this guy? Who is this guy? They didn't understand. They didn't accept who he was, and so it just astonished them because they didn't understand. They had hard hearts. And so when we start talking about a hard heart, what does that mean? It's really the thing that prevents us from understanding. It's the things that keep us from accepting the truth about Jesus. And that was really the challenge they were having. They had a hard heart because they were having a struggle accepting the truth about Jesus. Now, there's all sorts of reasons for that, but that's just what it was. In verse 14:31, he says, "O you little faith, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt me? You saw everything. You've been with me. You know who I am." Yet even though when you see those things, it really is hard to accept. You know, we know Jesus raised from the dead. But even we doubt, don't we? When times get hard, don't we get anxious? Don't we get scared? Don't we start to doubt? Don't we wonder how it's going to turn out? Don't we have all these challenges? And that's the same challenges these disciples had. They had doubt. So from the disciples' view, they're out there in the boat, and the challenge they had is they had no hope of rescue. Jesus was not in the boat with them. See, when you're in a storm and Jesus is sleeping in there, they can at least go to Jesus and say, "Don't you care that we're perishing?" He wakes up. "Oh, be still." Right? Jesus knew they were going to be fine. Jesus knew that God had promised to carry him safely through this life for these little things. He was at peace. But they didn't understand that. And so when they're out in the boat without Jesus, far from the shore, in the dark, stormy conditions, you think they're swimming out of that? No, that boat goes over. You're not swimming back to the shore. You wouldn't even know which way the shore was. It said they were 3 or 4 miles out. That's a pretty strong swim by anybody's standard. And so they weren't going to swim out of it, and so they had no hope of rescue. And what that meant is, I need this boat. This boat is my lifeline. That's what they were thinking. This boat. I need this boat. They had a strong contrary wind. And they needed the oars. You can't lose the boat, you can't lose the oars, right? Another thing you can't lose is the wind is blowing against them. I can't give up. It depends on my strength. I can't quit. If I quit rowing, this boat's at the south end of the Lake of Galilee, with or without me. I can't stop rowing. I need to be strong enough. It depends on my strength. Jesus wasn't with them. They couldn't cry out for him to hear. Now, that's what they were thinking. They couldn't cry out to Jesus. So they had all these problems. It depended on them, and they didn't have Jesus, the only access to power that they really understood. And so here they are, out in the middle of the wind, out in the middle of the lake. But we end up in those type of situations too, don't we? Maybe not on a lake. But what are your strong, persistent winds in your life? What is your wind and waves? Maybe your wind and waves is a struggle with sin. In 1 John 2:16, it says, the lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life. What is your struggle with sin? Doesn't your struggle with sin sometimes just become overwhelming? It just feels like, I don't know how I'm going to overcome this. This has been with me for years. I just keep having to work at it, and I don't know if I'm strong enough, but I can't stop because I don't want to be lost. Don't we sometimes let our pride get between our love for one another, and we elevate ourselves, make ourselves more important? So maybe it's your struggle with sin that is that prevailing wind against you, that's chopping and threatening your boat. Maybe it's a physical struggle of some sort. Sickness. So many people get cancer or some sort of severe chronic or severe acute illness that is life-threatening sometimes. Maybe life-threatening isn't always the worst thing. It's the quality of life-threatening things. You just know, I'm going to have to live with this pain and live with this illness, live with these conditions for year after year after year. And it just wears you down and discourages you. Maybe it's depression. Maybe that's the struggle you have, it's getting into wintertime. We're in Oregon. You're not going to see the sun very much for the next 9 months, right? Maybe that affects you. Some people it does. So maybe that's your struggle. It's just keeping a good attitude, that down feeling that comes along with the gray skies and sometimes bad circumstances in life, struggles and stress, that sort of thing. Maybe you have money troubles. Maybe you have a lot of debt, and that is a struggle for you. And same thing, right? You have it. I can't stop. I have to keep going. I need the boat. I need my job. I need my whatever it is. I need these things. I depend on them. These are my life. These are my life. If I don't have this, I'm in the lake and I can't swim out. Maybe you're unemployed. That's a hard situation. All these responsibilities you thought you could take care of, and all of a sudden, for some reason, you're not able to take care of them, and that eats at us. Maybe you got injured. Just a thing happened, harmed you. There's all sorts of physical struggles that we have that become these wind and waves. Maybe it's ghosts, things in the past. Sometimes people hurt us, and it's really hard to forgive those things. We hold that anger, that resentment, that bitterness against these people who truly wrongfully hurt us. It's hard to let go of. Maybe you have someone you need to forgive. Maybe you've done something and you haven't made it right yet. And you just keep wondering, when's the hammer going to drop? right? Maybe those are the things that you have struggled. Maybe it's spiritual discouragement. Sometimes that happens. It's not that you have a acute wrong thing happening, but you're just tired of rowing, tired of taking the stroke, knowing if I stop, I'm on the south end of the lake, that's not where I want to be. So you are just weary of rowing. When we get these winds and waves in our lives, what we'll start doing is we'll start defining the conditions for survival. What must I have? What do I need to survive? When do I know the ball is going to drop? When is it going to become too much I can handle? And we start defining these things. So you're out in a boat on the lake, right? You say, if we start taking on too much water, that is a problem. I need this boat. And so you're out there, you're rowing hard, and things are bad, but you don't have water in the boat, you feel fine. But what happens when you get an inch of water, or 2 inches of water, or a foot of water? All of a sudden, you're worried about the water, aren't you? You lose focus on other things because you stop rowing because you got to get the water. That is something. Maybe you start feeling weak, and you start saying, I have to be strong enough. I can't quit. It all depends on my strength. So you're rowing. It's the 4th hour, and your arms are hurting. And you can't stop rowing. Your back is sore. But you can't stop rowing. And if you start slowing down, you see you drift, and you say, I'm going to fail now. That's the condition. What do we do when we don't have those conditions? The boat needs to hold together. Maybe that's it. I need the boat. So every creak, every squeak, every crack, every time a wave hits from the wrong direction, you're going to be concerned about that boat, right? You're going to be worried about it. It's going to be something that's on your mind, and it's a distraction. You start saying, I need to find the solution. I need to figure out what direction to go. I need to know how to deal with these things. All of these things, we start fretting about. That's what brings anxiety in our life, isn't it? When you need the boat, you need the oars, you need to be strong enough, you need the water, you hear a creak, oh no, what's going to happen? What's that creak mean? And you worry about the creak in the boat, right? That didn't sound right. The squeak, I'll use squeak instead of the squeak in the boat. The noises that it makes that sound like it's going to break. And you need that. It's a condition for survival. And we hold to those things. We fret about those things. We let those things distract us from the most important thing. Right? We're not praying anymore. We're listening to the boat. We're not turning to God. We're trying to keep our oars in the water. We get distracted by these things. All the while, as we make these conditions for survival, we are diminishing our confidence in God's intervention. See, because it all depends on me and this boat and these oars and the direction I'm going, everything I can control. That's the concerns we have. That's where we get in the life. But we really need to trust Jesus. Where was Jesus during all this time? They're out in the lake having a hard time. He's up on the hill keeping an eye on them. So he's watching them. Was he with them? Yeah, Jesus was with them. Was he concerned about their well-being? It said he saw them straining at the oars. And I think it's Mark 6:48. He saw them straining at the oars. He saw it. He watched them. And he didn't consider it too much for them. He saw them straining at the oars. But he was not with them in the boat, but he was watching them. That's a good image. Imagine Jesus up on the hill, the little boat he sees out in the water struggling. Isn't that how Jesus is with our lives today? He's up in heaven, but he sees us. He knows where we're at. He knows our struggle. And he's keeping an eye on us. He knows when to come. Jesus saw their struggle and came when it became too great. Right? They had all these conditions. They had all these concerns. They were watching for the signs of doom that they had determined when this happens, that's what we got to be worried about. But Jesus was watching, and he knew, and he came to them when their struggle was too great. We have all these winds and waves in our life, don't we? Sickness, we have struggles, all these things, and sometimes it feels like God hasn't intervened yet. But that doesn't mean he's not with you. It doesn't mean he doesn't watch. All it means is he still has confidence in you. But when it gets too hard, Jesus will come. 1 Corinthians 10:13, it says that God is faithful, and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able, but with every temptation he will give you a way of escape so that you can endure. See, God knows your struggles. He knows your limits. And he will come deliver you when the time is right. It doesn't depend on all these other conditions. It depends on God. So he's with you. In Joshua 1:5, it says, I will not leave you or forsake you. Don't be afraid. I will not leave you or forsake you. And these are important verses. Let me see these are important verses because they make a very clear, distinct point that Jesus made. He's walking up to the boat. They see his shadow. They get afraid because they see what they think is a ghost or a spirit. And what did Jesus say to them? Mark chapter 6 and verse 50. He says, take heart, take courage. Isn't that what God says to his people? Do not fear, I will not leave you or forsake you. Take courage. I'm with you. He tells them, take courage. Then he says, well, my translation reads it is I. But in the Greek, the word is eimi ego. No, ego eimi. Something like that. No, eimi ego. It means I am. If you look in John chapter 8, verse 52, it's the same words, the same tense, used the same way, and Jesus says, before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I am. It's 8:58, not 8:52, if you're turning there. He says, before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I am. And when he's out there walking up to the boat, what does he say? Don't fear, I am. Now he's walking on the water. Where do we see someone over the surface of the water before? Genesis 1, right? The Spirit of the Lord was over the surface of the water. Jesus is showing them, I am God. I'm here. And I want you to think about this. He comes up to the boat, and Peter says, if it's you, Lord. He says, I am. He says, if it's you, Lord, command me to come out on the water. So Peter steps out on the water. That is a significant step. And it's a step we all need to take. Because the truth is, we don't need the boat. Right? You don't have to be strong enough. You don't need the oars. You don't have to. Because Jesus walks on water. Right? If you're in a lake rowing, you think you're going to sink, you think you can't swim out of it, but Jesus is with you. Did Peter have to worry about swimming out of it? No. They just never considered that solution, did they? It never occurred to them, I can walk away from this. And a lot of times, when we face our winds and waves, when we think, I need this boat, or I need this job, or I need my health, I need this relationship, I need this, whatever it is. We get so wrapped up in what we think we need, we forget, even out in the middle of a lake, we can walk away from it, right? That's just the thing we never could. But that's the power of God. You don't need the boat. What was the problem that the disciples had? They didn't understand Jesus. They didn't understand the truth about Jesus. But when you understand the truth about the Lord, the truth about Jesus, who he really is, you'll understand that these things that we worry about, that cause us so much trouble in life, they don't matter. They have no true consequence. God will not leave you or fail you. Jesus is always with you. You don't need the boat. That's the real answer. You don't need the boat. You'll walk away from it. And that was the troubles the disciples had. It says they didn't understand Jesus. They didn't get it. Jesus was God. And I want to end, if you all open your Bibles with me to Psalm 95. I guess the last point I would make on that is Jesus calmed the storm. Not only could he walk away, but he calmed the storm. Right? Everything we're worried about, God can fix just like that. And so we don't have to worry. Open with me to Psalm 95. I'll just read the first couple verses, and then I'll skip down to verse 6. It says, "O come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence and give thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise with him, songs of praise." I just want to stop right there. We will define what we need to succeed. What's going to be the thing, right? But God is the rock of our salvation. If you want to be saved, if you want deliverance from this life, God is the rock. But turn with me to verse 6, and we'll recognize these words. It says, "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you hear his voice." I just want to stop right there. In this psalm, it says he's the God who made the sea. He's the God of all power. And he deserves us to come and worship and bow down. And if you hear his voice, that implies a choice we need to make. When you hear his voice, how are you going to respond? Are you going to respond like the disciples did here? They had a hard heart. They didn't understand. When you hear his voice, listen to it. Believe it. Trust it. Put your entire hope in it. Commit completely to the voice of Jesus Christ. Commit completely to your ways. Because the warning is, it says in verse 7, it says, "For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, as on the day of Massah in the wilderness, when your fathers put me to the test and put me to the proof, though they had seen my work. For 40 years I loathed that generation and said, they are a people who go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. Therefore I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest." What this says is, if you harden your heart, you're never going to know the Lord's ways, and you're never going to enter into his rest. We need to put our confidence in Jesus, because the other side to that, if you don't harden your heart, if you accept truth about Jesus Christ, then you will understand his ways. And he will deliver you. He will be your hope. He will be the rock of your salvation. He will be your peace in troubled times. He will be your shelter, your shield, your deliverer, your salvation. He will be the one who pays your debt, forgives your sins. He'll be the one to gently guide you, just as a shepherd lovingly guides his lambs. Just as a mother lovingly cares for her child, so God will care for you if, when you hear his words, you respond. So I believe it's in Hebrews where he uses this same scripture. He says, if you hear his voice today, then today is the day of your salvation. If you need to respond to the call of Jesus Christ, if you want to take the steps to make your life right with God, if you want to commit to the Lord or amend your ways, please come forward as we stand and sing number 255, the Song of Invitation.
I am resolved no longer to linger,
Charmed by the world's